morning, good afternoon, good evening. I've said on this platform that Zimbabwe is a failed state. You could come to the same conclusion from many different angles. And one of those is to be that the nation is the misfortune of having had, at least so far, a succession of political leaders. Initially, Zanu PF, and now the MDC CCC opposition, who are corrupt, incompetent, and utterly useless. One of their failings is how quickly they forget what they've been elected to do, or what they've been campaigning to do. Before independence in 1980, one of the key issues that the nation was fighting for was one man, one vote. And yet, as the nation edged closer to independence, Zanu PF changed the goalpost. In the 1980 elections, the one that ushered in the country's independence, Zanu PF, Robert Mugabe and his friends signed the Lancaster House Agreement, in which they undertook to withdraw their freedom fighters operating in the field during the campaign period for the coming elections. And yet, by the time they got back to Zimbabwe, they told their operatives that only a fraction of them would be sent to assembly points. The rest were left in the field with the instructions to tell the people that if Zanu PF does not win the elections, the bush war would continue. So out went one man, one vote. The people themselves made the mistake of thinking that if they fought to end the bush war, everything would be normal again. Not knowing that, of course, typical of tyrants, the more you give in to appease them, the more they demand. Because 3 years later, 1983, Zanu PF was to launch the infamous Kukurawundi massacre, whose primary purpose was to coerce the only other real political party that posed a serious political challenge to Mugabe's hold on power, PF SAPU, to give up their claim as an independent party and force them to join Zanu PF, which they duly did in 1987 by signing the Unity Accords. And that paved the way for Mugabe to impose the de facto one-party state, and the rest is history, as one would say. Zanu PF has never held free, fair, and credible elections. And in 2001, the Western nations imposed sanctions on the regime. If the truth be told, the sanctions were no different from the sanctions that the UN had imposed on the Ian Smith regime to force the regime to uphold basic human rights, including holding free, fair, and credible elections. Zanu PF, of course, would want to have its own twist. But the truth still remains. Because in 2008, SADC and the AU, the regional body, and the continental body, refused to give Zanu PF political legitimacy following the blatant cheating and the wanton violence in the 2008 elections. Zanu PF was forced to sign the global political agreement, which led to the formation of the GNU. The signing of the global political agreement is no different, and it was meant to force Zanu PF to achieve the same purpose as the sanctions imposed on the regime in 2001. And here comes the opposition. The opposition in Zimbabwe, the primary purpose of the opposition since the late 1990s was to implement democratic changes to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. That cannot be denied. Indeed, when Morgan Tsvangirai and his friends launched their party, they called it the Movement for Democratic Change, promising the people that they will deliver the democratic changes that the nation was dying for. And yet, no sooner had they got into power, they got big-headed. They forgot about reforms. And here is an interview that Arthur Mutambara, who was the deputy prime minister in the GNU, gave at the World Economic Forum soon after the formation of the GNU.
Sanctions at this juncture in our history are meaningless. They have no efficacy whatsoever. Why? Because the sanctions were put in place to support me. They were put in place to support Mr. Morgan Tsvangirai, our Prime Minister. Mr. Tsvangirai is now saying the sanctions must go. I am saying the sanctions must go. So what is the value of the sanctions when the beneficiaries of the sanctions are saying they don't need them?
The truth of the matter is, the sanctions were not imposed to help MDC leaders like Morgan Tsvangirai and Arthur Mutambara and the rest to secure their gravitating seats. The sanctions were imposed to force Zanu PF to hold free, fair, and credible elections. Just as the global political agreement was signed for that purpose. So therefore, for somebody to then turn around, and this is when they had not implemented even one token reform, and yet here we are. Our friend Arthur Mutambara is talking of, we should lift the sanctions. How many reforms have you implemented? Not even one token reform. This is one of the problems we have with our leaders. In Shona, we have a saying that watumira bete kumukaka, which basically means you sent, roughly translated, you've sent the cockroach to fetch milk. And the cockroach gets so enticed, starts feeding on the milk, it forgets why it was sent there. And this has been a recurring theme with our politicians. MDC leaders failed to implement even one token reform throughout the 2008 to 2013 GNU. And it is because of that failure that Zanu PF, even now, is able to blatantly rig the elections, putting us back straight where we were before the GNU. It is a pity that many Zimbabweans out there, even to this date, with the benefit of hindsight, still do not understand that the primary purpose of the 2008-2013 Global Political Agreement was to implement the democratic reforms to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. That was the primary purpose. It is deeply regrettable that not even one token reform was implemented during that golden period, with that golden opportunity. Not even one. And worse still, the people themselves have failed to realize that the MDC leaders betrayed them. And so this whole issue of, after failing to implement even one token reform, the people still continue to follow the opposition leader, the MDC, CCC leaders. It's a sick joke. Why are you still putting your trust on the leaders who have just betrayed you so blatantly? Indeed, post the GNU, MDC leaders have repeatedly conned the people, telling them they've devised strategies of winning rigged elections and enticing the people to participate in these flawed elections. Only for the same leaders to turn around the day after the voting is done, complaining that Zanu PF rigged the elections. The people themselves were slow to realize that it was the same leaders who were telling them that they had strategies of winning rigged elections. And so the lie was perpetrated in 2013 when the opposition, disregarding the advice from SADC not to participate in those elections without reform, they went ahead confident that they would win the elections. When they failed, they complained that the elections were rigged. Only to come back in 2018, and Chamisa himself was telling the people, MDC Alliance has got stringent measures to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. The day after the voting was done, he was complaining that Zanu PF had rigged the elections. 5 years down the line, 2023, he was the one who was telling the people again that he had plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. Triple C is going to win big. The day after the voting, he was admitting Zanu PF rigged the elections. This cycle is being repeated over and over again. It's sickening. Zimbabwe has got the elections coming up, 2028. And the most sickening thing we can do then is participate in those flawed elections, only to give Zanu PF legitimacy. Because we would have believed Chamisa or some other opposition leader that they've plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. Food for thought.